Hi, it's Greg McMillan here from the iPhoneography podcast. It is Monday, June 30th, and our days are now getting shorter, which kind of stinks. But um, today we are going to talk about, we're going to get back to one of the basics of photography, and this is kind of in general, and that is composition. Um, I guess before I go any further, though, I will bring in these guys, Dave and Dwight. Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey, Dave and Greg.
Heyo.
So I forget whose idea this was. I think it was your idea, Dwight, to do composition, um, and I think it's a good one. So we're going to, just touch on a few different aspects of composition because there's a lot. Like, I mean, there's a lot that we're not going to be able to cover. But uh, so watchers on YouTube, you're going to be able to see some images that we talk about that relate to composition. And listeners of the audio podcast, don't forget, check your screen on your phone. As long as you're on Apple Podcasts or Overcast or any podcast player that shows the images. To this day, I don't think Spotify shows that. But most of our listeners are on the Apple Podcast app, so that's a good thing. But anyway, when we talk about these different things, we're going to have examples to show, because this is a visual medium that we're talking about, right? So I think it's always a good idea to kind of let everybody see what we're talking about here. The first thing we're going to kind of we'll touch on real quickly here is the definition of composition and why it matters in photography. So, Dwight, what would you say your definition of composition would be?
Well, I mean, for me, when I first started out in photography, I was really just kind of, what looked good in the frame to me. And I was looking back on some of my old photos when I was really young, and I think it was just a little pocket camera with a rotating flash on it. And I did pretty well. I mean, it has to draw the viewer in, and I really, how would I define it? I mean, what draws the viewer into the photo? And I think that's something that we're going to talk about tonight. And what makes it interesting? What helps the viewer's flow of the photo? Is it working to where you may have a natural frame or leading lines or rule of thirds. I mean, there's certain techniques that you can use to really draw the viewer's attention to your photo. If the composition's off, it's really tough to look at a photo, in my opinion. So I think we'll need to talk a little bit about it, Greg, with some visuals to really kind of get down to the nuts and bolts as to why it's important.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, we might as well just jump right into it. Well, actually, first of all, Dave, can you think of any reasons why composition would be important in photography?
Sure. I mean, one thing is a lot of times you want to convey an emotion or convey a sense of place when you're taking a photo. Because as you're taking the photo, you, of course, have access to the world. You have access to everything. And you're just taking a small slice of that. And when you're taking that small slice, now, admittedly, it's a little bit easier with digital cameras, especially if you take a wider shot and crop it. You can recompose where in the past you couldn't, but you're still taking a smaller slice that you have to think as you're taking that photo. Am I getting am I showing what I want to show? And a big part of that, in addition to lighting and getting everything else correct, but composition, getting the shot the way that you want to see it. And I think we do have a bit of an advantage for modern photography, especially with iPhone and Android, is that we have a very large viewer We have that entire screen that we can look at. Where in the past, if you want to go way back, if you did like a through the lens for film camera, you got a very small image that you had to do. It was kind of hard to see. Or even, your DSLRs, where the viewing screens are still only like 3 inches across, maybe 4 inches on bigger ones. And it's kind of hard to get a feel for what the shot will look like. And so that's why I think it's important to think about it before you take the shot, and as you're setting it up, where you're going to be, where items in the shot are going to be, because it's one of those things that it's really, even though it's, AI makes it easier to fake stuff, but to get the actual reality, where lighting you can correct, harshness you can correct, coloration, make if the shot's too cool or too warm. You can play with that in post. Composition is one of those things that's just kind of in there. So that's one of the things you have to think about when you're taking the shot.
Yeah. Now you see, folks, this is what I love about these two guys. Neither one of those guys knew I was going to ask them these questions, and they both answered them like really good. Like you'd almost think they're professionals.
Don't let that fool you.
And those are great answers. And that's just another example of how we fly by the sweet seat of our pants doing this show. Because basically I just kind of thought of these questions, on the fly as well. So, but the rest of this is going to be kind of sort of planned here.
Yeah, Greg, I'd like to say one other thing, if you don't mind. And
yeah.
I think Dave hit on something really important. And you're capturing a small slice of the entire world. A writer writes words to elicit the viewer's interpretation of what they are writing. We're doing that without words. So how do we write a book? By snapping a frame. And in order to really do that and convey the emotions or the feelings that you're trying to achieve by taking a photo, you have to think about composition, or people won't really spend the time analyzing the photo.
Yeah, that is so true. And that kind of goes along with that saying, the picture's worth 1,000 words, because you can tell a story with a photo, and or you could tell like a series of stories to make up a novel type of thing with a series of images type of thing. So those are really good, valid points. So the first thing we're going to hit on is probably the most common rule in composition, and the most basic rule in composition, and that's the rule of thirds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up this picture here, and Dwight,
Greg,
I'll let you.
Before we dive in, I know things are called rules, and these, remember though, these are guidelines.
Yeah.
There literally is no hard and fast rule with art. You could say on average, a picture will look better if it's not centered. One item in the center, surrounded by clutter, will look worse than using rule of thirds. Or if you use, and I forget the exact term and I'm trying to think of it, the other one that has like the spiral that goes on the inside on ways you can,
isn't that Fibonacci or something?
It's a Fibonacci,
Yep.
which is much harder to remember than rule of thirds. Mm-hmm. So, one thing to remember is, as we're going through this, these are good rules, especially since they're relatively easy to remember and to do, the follow in general. But, if you come across something, especially for people who are just maybe starting off, don't think, oh, I have to do rule of thirds. I would say, especially since, and this is something we've said multiple times with digital, you can do a photo with rule of thirds and think, okay, that's my rule of thirds photo. I want to take another photo and use another setup and use another composition to see which one I like better.
Mm-hmm.
Give it a try. But yeah, I would say what we're going over are great rules of thumb.
Yeah.
Oh my. I don't know if you can hear the crackling in the background, but I do
Is
have a
that the thunder?
thunderstorm on. That was the thunder. That was
Oh, I did hear that.
yes, yeah, yeah. So if all of a sudden I go away, you'll know what happened.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so I mean, guidelines, suggestions, and there's that old saying, rules are made to be broken, right? Uh, so what we'll do is, if I can get this back, I'm going to do that, and then I'll do this. Okay, there we go. So we're going to start with the rule of thirds, and Dwight, this is your image, so I'll let you talk a little bit about the rule of thirds.
All right. When we talk about the rule of thirds, you basically take this photograph and draw two vertical lines and two horizontal lines, so it looks like you're getting ready to play tic-tac-toe. So you have 9 equal squares in this entire photo. So applying the rule of thirds on this photo, I've got this guy with his surfboard at the intersection point of the lower square. And I will show you a diagram later that will make more sense, but he's right on that corner. So if you come over from the left side of the frame and to where he's on the first third. So you have 2 more thirds beyond him. And from the bottom up, he's on the first third from the bottom. So at that intersection point, in this case, why you would want to use composition such as this, as opposed to just putting the surfer in the middle, as Dave had mentioned earlier, is it draws attention to the surfer and the direction that he's heading, and it leads you into the photograph to the direction. So you naturally look to see where he's going from the point he's at now. Now, I broke a rule of thirds. Essentially, a lot of landscape photographers, say, hey, that horizon line should be on the upper or 2/3 up from the bottom. But in this case, I just used the intersection point from the left and up. I didn't care about the horizon line because I wanted some of that sky in there because it was dramatic. So hopefully this photo has you look at the surfer and then your eyes go in the direction that he's walking to see where he's going. And then that can kind of draw you around up through the sky.
Yeah, and there's another kind of rule, I guess you could say, that comes to my mind when I look at this image, and that is the horizon. I'm a real stickler for the horizon line being perfectly level. Um, if it's off a little bit, that just kind of tells me that you didn't really take your time and compose the image very well. You didn't spend enough time, thinking about the composition and what how the image is going to look after you've taken it. Now I know there's a lot of there's a lot of times when you're just taking pictures real quick and whatever, but if you're trying to take a good picture that you want to use for like an artistic reason, whether it's to show off your talents on social or whatever, I always say keep that horizon line level and getting to where the rules are made to be broken. I think that if it's tilted more than say 30 degrees, then that's intentional. Well, it could be a happy accident, but sometimes you can intentionally really slant the horizon for artistic reasons, abstract, whatever. There's good artistic reasons to do that, but if it's off just a little wee bit, it just makes it, in my opinion, and I'm not trying to be harsh on anybody, but it just makes it a bad picture.
Yeah.
You know, and if you happen to take a picture like that, it doesn't take much in post to just straighten that level that horizon out again. So
Yeah,
it's
I'm the same way. And I'm also the same way about so sometimes you have to transform your photos because our photos will take pictures and the buildings will be crooked. That type,
oh yeah,
I like to try to fix the perspective, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always. I know that doesn't look horizontal, but I think I think there's an optical illusion there, unless I let that one go. But I'm usually very much of a stickler of a
Yeah.
horizontal
It
horizon as
looks
well.
pretty straight to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the
And
first thing
also
I do.
having, sorry, well, I say
Go ahead.
also having a horizontal, assuming that, and admittedly, having a water-based horizon makes keeping it level a lot easier. But it does give you something to ground yourself on, where you have a feeling for how other things are placed because that's a straight flat line.
Mm-hmm.
And you're almost expecting, or even on ground, but it's not as easy on ground, especially if you're in a hilly area, that if you look far enough out, it's all going to kind of level off and your eyes kind of expecting that. And like you said, Greg,
Yeah.
it's one thing, it's one of those things where something almost, I don't want to say like an uncanny valley, but similar, where if it's just a little bit off, there's something that just hits your brain when something's just a little bit off
Yeah.
that niggles at you, versus, like you said, now, I honestly, for, unless you really want to show something crazy artistic, having a 30% horizon on an ocean view is one thing. But, I could see around where I am, where it's pretty hilly, there are some hills which are 30% here, 20% here. And, showing that off on purpose. But if you only have something that's off just by a little bit, you're like, it looks weird.
Yeah.
Versus here,
Yeah.
where it gives you that nice. It actually helps also rule of thirds and leading lines, where you can see you have your horizontal there. You have the clouds going off in one direction. You have the shore kind of going off and to the right. And
Yeah, it can be
it's
kind
not
of
a
a
flat
V.
short line either. Yeah, it's not a flat short line either. Since it's going off on an angle, but the horizon's flat, that really accentuates that angle there too.
Yeah, and I should mention that everybody that has an iPhone, you are able to enable the grid lines in there to show the rule of thirds by going to your camera settings and flipping that switch on, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, and that will help you compose your photos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we got kind of on a real big, it's my fault. Sorry. We got off on a really big tangent here about the horizon line. But I mean, this image just screamed to talk about that. But as far as the rule of thirds go, Dwight, you nailed it with this picture, obviously, because you're right where the 2 points intersect. And I think the big reason that the rule of thirds is probably one of the most fundamental rules about composition is that because it makes it aesthetically pleasing to look at the image. If you had taken, I know you're gonna beat this up a little bit later here, but if that surfer was not where he is now, then the image would not be as aesthetically pleasing to look at, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd probably just look at the sky and say, yeah, cool sky.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But being that it's in that intersection there, the surfer becomes the subject. The dramatic sky, the rocky shoreline, all that stuff is is second to the surfer, in my opinion. Like, my eye gets drawn to the surfer being in that part of the image. So,
And
I
if
think
you look
that's
at the shoreline, if you look at the rocks that kind of come from the bottom up to the right, the light rocks that parallel the shore, and then you have kind of the light coming down if I really boosted the contrast on there, you can see that V in there, but I didn't want to overdo it. So there's some leading lines there, as Dave mentioned.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's a great example of the rule of thirds for sure. So next we're going to get into leading lines, and Dave, you've got a really, really good example here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is a little road next to a country club. So as you can see, it's a little shaded there, and this isn't really a straight leading line. If you think about
and that's a good thing about it is
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be, right?
Exactly. Because I think a lot of, at least the first time I remember being introduced to leading lines was art class in like 5th or 6th grade. And it's
a couple
the
years ago.
classic, oh yeah, just a year or two ago. But it was the classic, here's a road, here's some telephone poles, and they're all kind of going off. You can see the line for perspective where they're all kind of leading one direction. But you can just kind of lead in a general direction, even if it's straight away, where this is an access road. So you can see there's divots in it and it's not exactly straight and flat, but it kind of leads the eye off from where you're starting. So where you're starting, at least for me, feels like this is where you're starting at, and this is kind of the path that you're getting led down. And I think it helps not only because, you have nature-ish, which I'll call a golf course nature-ish, there, and you have this kind of, non-nature kind of plowing through it with the road, but you have the color differences here too, where you have green everywhere, but here's the broken up blacktop that's kind of grayed out by now, worn down, and it's kind of cutting through here and leading you through.
Yeah, it leads my eye through the image. So, I mean, you've got leading lines with the road or the path, but you've also got very distorted leading lines with the tree line, the top and bottom of the tree line. It kind of goes over to the right, and there's my dog trying to make her appearance. The leading, like the trees, are leading your eyes over to the top right of the frame, from the top left to the top right. Like you go up the path in the middle, and then the tree line picks up my eyes and goes around to the right hand side, comes down, and through the shrubs and stuff like that on the right hand side, and then back up on the path again. So it's making my eyes go around the frame and seeing all the different elements of the image. You've got the path bang right in your face in the foreground, and then goes up into the middle ground or whatever of the image, and then the trees, another sort of kind of foreground element, but they lead into a background element, and my eyes just kind of go around the frame. So those leading lines in both respects, the road and the trees, are doing their job. They're leading my eyes through the frame. So I think it's a really good example.
Yeah, I can't say much more than the both of you guys said. When again, when you first look at this photograph, the first thing you see is the beginning of this drive, and then now all of a sudden your eyes are a car. You're naturally going to follow that road to see what's at the top. And for me, those are leading lines right to a golf course where I would probably pull off and hit a few balls on the green illegally. So, yeah, no, good example. Again, I think the intent is to have something that draws the viewer into the photo, and I think that's the purpose of a leading line.
Yeah, for sure.
And it could be multiple leading lines. It can be,
Yeah,
there could be a river coming from the right, a driveway coming from the left, leading to something somewhere. So,
yeah. Now, a gentleman in my local camera club, when you said leading from the left there, Dwight, that just kind of clicked into me what he said. This guy at the club, when he shows like water flowing, he always will orient the image so that it's flowing left to right. Even if if he took the photo and it's flowing right to left, he'll flip it.
so natural
because-
reading direction. Is that what it is?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And see, that's what helps about this picture here that you supplied, Dave, is that the fact that your eyes go up in the middle, yes, but the trees take your eyes from the left to the right, which is a very natural thing to happen. So I mean, it's I guess if we're going to try to help people with their composition, then that's a good lesson to be learned. Is think about when you're composing your shot, think about trying to orient it so that things flow maybe left to right. Now, over on the other side of the world, it might have to be the other way because they read right to left type of thing.
Right.
In some places, right? But
right, exactly. And so in some cultures, even in the West, read differently in
Yeah,
terms
yeah.
of different. But yeah, I mean, if you're in someone, or know if you're putting this out for a group to look at, know
Mhm.
your audience a little bit. Even if
Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah.
even as formally as social media, know
Oh, sure.
that most of the people who do this are in these countries. So if I wanted to, make sure people understand what I'm trying to portray in my photos, I have to make sure I speak their language, speak their visual language.
Yeah, yeah. And Todd says about this photo here, the path and the grass on either side, con
Mhm.
the grass that's on either side contrasting with the path are
Yeah.
additionally leading. And yeah, that's basically what the idea
Mhm.
is here. Is it's
Yeah.
the contrast actually helps your eyes. I mean, it doesn't help your eyes. It captures your attention, I guess you could say,
Mhm.
to follow those leading lines. So yeah, that's like I said, Dave, that's a great example of leading
Thanks.
lines for sure. So next we have framing, and this is a shot that I took in a city a couple of hours south of me here, Hamilton, Ontario, and this is just classic framing, I guess you could say, in a shot. All the boats are in their slips along the dock there, and they're obviously they're framed by the trees above and a little bit at the side, and then the foreground. Um, and what kind of struck me about this picture in the first place was the seagull sitting there looking out at the boats. But as far as composition goes, I think it's kind of a pleasing way to show those boats because you've got not only the trees framing top and coming down the sides, but they're not really framing, but the trees in the background kind of go with those trees a little bit. It almost makes a frame on the top half of the composition with the boats in front of the trees in the background. But it's just, instead of just plain water at the bottom, like if I'd have went to the edge and stood at the edge and just shot those boats, there'd be no framing at all. But I think with the trees and stuff framing all the boats and that, I think it just makes for a little more interesting picture, if anything.
Yeah, and I would also say, thinking back to the early days of, let's say, Instagram, where everyone put a frame on their photo.
Oh yeah.
It was, and we're going back to the square days of Instagram, and
Yeah.
everyone put a frame on it because it felt like it was a way to not necessarily contain the image, but to literally frame the image and put a border around it. And doing this way, you're putting the border as part of the image. It's where the trees and the path down below act as a top and bottom when it comes to
Yeah.
framing it up. And the fact that the leaves there's a lot in shadowed there. So it's not silhouette, but it is definitely darker. You can tell you're in a shaded area where you're kind of framing. And framing also is a nice way to make sure people get the focus where you want them to. Because we know most of the time when someone's seeing your photos now, you're not there next to them to say, "Oh, by the way, let me point out this really interesting thing that I wanted to get along with the rest of the image." You have to let the composition, like I said, with leading lines, rule thirds, and with guide the viewer to where you want to see it. Like if you want to emphasize the boats here and being in a line like they are, framing it on top and bottom guides you on the inside, similar to vignetting,
Yeah.
where you're saying, no, don't pay it. I don't want to say don't ignore the outside, but the thing I want you to pay attention to is the middle there. So the framing here says, okay, here's the thing I want you to really notice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've accomplished a few things here, Greg, and I think there's at least one you may not be aware of, but I think I'm going to point it out. But some other examples of framing would be shooting through a window at something that's outside. Excuse me. Sorry about that, guys. Anyway, what you've done here is you've got that top frame, you've got that building in the background, which is on that third. You probably did that subconsciously.
Yeah, totally subconsciously.
Yeah, so you've got the natural frame and also the aesthetic from, you know me, I'm a stickler about foreground, midground, and background for a landscape shot. So
Yeah.
as Dave mentioned, you've got a natural vignette on the top, and then, the road and everything closes it off down at the bottom, and you're just looking through the frame out into the distance. So yeah, good example.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I don't often intentionally frame things. Like I wasn't thinking of framing when I took this. I think it was just, it looked pleasing to my eye when I was standing there taking a picture. And I mean, it was also a really hot day and I stood in the shade, so that kind of helped. But yeah, it's just aesthetically pleasing to my eyes when I kind of looked at it. And the funny thing, I've been doing this long enough, and especially with the phones, with an iPhone, that I can almost like I could look at a scene without holding the phone up, and I can almost see in my mind what it's going to look like in the viewfinder. And I think that kind of happened here. Like I realized, okay, I'm not going to walk up to the edge and take this shot. I'm going to stay back and have everything framed in. And it just worked. So um, it's definitely not a happy accident. It was definitely a kind of a pre-visualized shot, I guess you could say. But the actual concept of framing wasn't. If it was in my mind, it was subconsciously. But it just worked out. So
Yeah, I think it's a good move. I mean, if you would have walked up to the water's edge and took that shot, it would have just looked like a line of boats, unless you did something creative with it.
yeah, I think I have a shot or two where I did that. I think I might have gone up to the shoreline, but I think when I did, I actually used the 5x to get more detail on the boats.
Yeah.
But I don't think I would have taken a wide shot like this just from the shoreline, just unless the only thing I would have done was maybe try to get the reflections at the bottom, maybe try to get them in the shot, but I'd have to go look through them and see. Um, so that's framing, and now we're going to look at symmetry. And I pulled one out of the old photos that we've done in the show in the past, and this is one that Dave took, and the symmetry in this photo is just so cool. It golly, it's almost absolutely 100% perfect in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously the building, they try to do symmetry anyways. This is an older church, but the fact that even the bulletin boards on either side
Yeah.
match, except for the lettering, but even, their heights, everything just, you can almost cut it in half, flip it, mirror it over, and you would get the image there.
Mhm.
And it draws you in, especially now. Symmetry also works in natural too. And you just don't have to have the left-right symmetry like we have here, like a mirror symmetry. You can have a radial symmetry like in a snowflake or in a flower. Something that, but having something where you do have that symmetry of any type, it really draws out because it's unusual, because so many things aren't that good. I don't want to say perfect, but very close symmetry. You look around your room, you look outside, there's differences from you look to the left, look to the right, there's differences. But when you see where it's not, that really draws you in.
Mhm.
And the fact that for this one, it's not only the symmetry, but it's a symmetry of you're kind of getting funneled towards the center with the entrance.
Yeah,
Sorry.
There not much more I can say, I think, relative to that. They're messing with my mind because the signs in the doors are not symmetrical. I want to go in there and tear those things off, but
But
Yeah.
you know
So
what? They're okay. So looking at those signs, I was agreeing with you until I started to realize that they're symmetrical, but also maybe a little like just slightly vertically inverted. On the left, you've got the white sign a little higher than the white
Yeah.
sign on the right,
the hanger
but
on the
on
right
the
is just a little bit longer.
far side of each one, you got the yellow one that's lower on the left and
Oh, you're
higher on the
right.
right.
That balances it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
So it does have that, that symmetrical feel to it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a
And
good example. Great.
yeah, yeah. And
Dave,
like
yeah.
you said, Dave, it kind of takes you almost like into a tunnel, a very, very
Mhm.
shallow tunnel, but a tunnel, because
Right.
up the steps and into the archway of the doorway and that. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's a really cool example of symmetry. And symmetry can be like we're looking at it. So we've got horizontal symmetry going across the image this way, but you could have a symmetrical image like you've showed some in the past, Dave, in your recent photos where you've been at the water and the tree line on the top reflected on the bottom
Mhm.
in the water. So a nice, good, clean reflection is another great example of symmetry.
Mhm.
And so there's all kinds of ways to make symmetry, and I think the biggest, most important part is to make sure that it's basically the same on each side of the frame, whether it's left and right or top and bottom.
Mhm.
Or you can actually go like a perfect diagonal from say the bottom corner, left corner to
Mhm.
the top right corner. That can create a bit of symmetry, whether it's an abstract image or whatever. So
Mhm.
um, yeah, so there's all kinds of ways to create symmetry in an image. And our last one that we're going to look at here is, and again, I pulled this out of the older shows. Dwight, you had this surfer, and this is all about negative space.
Yeah. So I took this with the reflex 240 millimeter from the base of the Newport Pier, and there were about 10 surfers on the backside of that wave sitting for the next wave. So I took them all out because I wanted to have freedom to breathe in this photo. I didn't want the viewer to be looking at all the different objects in this image. So my intention was a surfer on the right rule of thirds, again with that space in front of him, so you can see the direction of travel and what lies ahead of him. And I think freedom is, I mean, negative space is about just kind of freedom to breathe. You don't feel like you have to look at multiple objects in a frame. You'll see some photos where it might just be a telephone pole with a bird on it, and the rest is just blank sky. You
Mhm.
know, that's pleasing, and it just, it's relaxing. So I think that's kind of what I interpret as uh, this form of composition.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't tell by looking at it that you've taken people out. But of course, disclosing that I think is an important aspect of photography. It's all about being upfront and honest about the image. And but the negative space, it just, I mean, you can tell that it's the ocean. You can tell that there's a
Mhm.
lot of vastness, you know, there that we just can't see. So it kind of let me see. It makes me think of solitude. Um, as far as we know, he could be the only surfer out there for miles.
Mhm.
Yeah,
In
stress
a
does not
way that kind
exist.
of, yeah, in a way that kind of tells a story.
Mhm.
Um, you could call this the lonely surfer, or something to that effect. But yeah, all that negative space, it just, to me, it just screams vastness and that we can't see.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And not only that, but the fact that the background isn't overly detailed and it's a very neutral color. The foreground background are very neutral. So it's not a matter of, you can still do negative space with non-neutral colors, but having it just that very light shade of blue versus the deeper blue of the wave itself, and the more the texture of the peaking of the waves there in the white part versus the rest of it where it's very neutral, very, like you see a little bit of ripple, so it's not completely flat, but there's no heavy grain or texture. Really gives it that feeling, like you said, Greg, of solitude. Someone just being out there by themselves.
Yeah, I think you're right, because if the water was any darker, and I can't remember if I dodged that back there, for people that don't know what that is making that part of the image lighter. Can't remember if I did that, but I think if it was dark as the wave was, we wouldn't have as much freedom to breathe, and it would distract us.
Yeah. It's I think it's as good an example as any to show negative space. And I mean, space. Space is room. It's just it's anything but it's anything that's not occupied by something, right? So it's a good example. So as far as the the rules of composition go, like I said, there's so many that we haven't covered. There's centered subjects. We talked about tilted horizons a little bit. Dynamic framing, and there's all kinds of different things that we just don't have time to touch on. I mean, we could do probably 3 or 4 shows on composition alone, because there's so much to dive into. But I think we covered some of these pretty good, and hopefully they give the listeners an opportunity to maybe pause a little bit. And one thing that I think if I could have a tip on composition, I think that would be to use a tripod, because when you use a tripod to compose your shot, you're intentionally taking longer. It gives you more time to think about what you're trying to capture in your image. And, taking that little extra time could allow you to think about some of these things about composition, and just make a better shot, whether it's just simply straightening the horizon or what. But I mean, if you hold your phone up and you're just taking a shot, you're probably not going to think about these things as much. But if you put it on a tripod, and you're even just the time it takes to adjust the tripod to get that level horizon, and you could look at what you got in the frame, and you could think, oh no, that's not right, I got to move it over a little bit or whatever. So intentionally taking the time to think about the composition, I think, would really help. So any last words on basically what we've talked about here, guys, before we move on to our recent photos?
No, I think there's a lot to be investigated here. So this is just the basics.
Yeah. So okay. So speaking of our recent photos, we're going to try something a little different, and that is instead of giving the listeners and viewers a history lesson or a geography lesson or anything like that to do with these photos, we're going to start incorporating the show topic into the recent photos. So today's show is about composition. So now our recent photos are going to be photos that we've taken recently, but we're going to talk more about the composition of these photos than anything. I mean, we could probably say, it was taken here, but then that's it. We're not going to go on about, where we were and how we got there and all that stuff. We're just going to, but we're going to kind of dive a little deeper into the composition of these pictures, because, well, these are pictures that we haven't shown before. So, and I think I've always said about photography, teach what you know and learn what you don't. And I'll speak for myself. I learn from these guys every week, or every 2 weeks, or whenever it is we do these shows, because there's always something to be learned. And but I guess part of doing this show is to help people improve their photography. And, that's basically what we want to try to do with our recent photos. We want to showcase what we've been doing lately and show you our part of the world. But we'll also try to teach you a little bit about what the show is all about, like each episode. So, um, with that being said, we will go to this first one. Oops. There we go. Now, Dwight, you said you were going to illustrate the rule of thirds a little better. So this is an image that we put in here, but it leads into your first recent photo. So
Yeah.
I'll
So
let you take it away.
yeah, this is just an illustration of the rule of thirds. So he's on the top left third, and what's nice about having him up there is that you can see his reflection on the bottom. So the whole left third is taken care of, and then you actually have the horizon kind of on the upper third. This is not my photo. I just found this, and it illustrated what the rule of thirds looks like. So the two photos that I had that had the rule of thirds that we've already seen, you can see in front of them that there's a lot of room. It kind of draws the viewer in. It's like, what's he looking at? What's he thinking? So I'm going to compare and contrast that with my first recent photo. Okay. Again, I've got that horizon relatively in the middle, and Greg seems to pick that out every time. not that he, but it's not on a third because I wanted to get more of the sun, the sky in than and I wanted him on the third. So that's just how it ended up. So what I wanted to contrast on this thing is, this gentleman is obviously deep in thought. He was standing there like that for a long time, and it kind of elicited an emotion in me like, hey, this guy's thinking about something. He's been standing there for a long time. I'm not going to put him on the left third because I don't think he knows where he's going right now because he's been standing there a long time. So I put him on the right third. And what happens to the viewer is they'll look at this photograph, they'll come across, they'll see that guy, and they don't know what's happening after him, which actually creates tension. So I, on purpose, took this photo to create tension. And I think I nailed it on this one because this guy was in deep thought. And I don't remember if I even might have gone up and talked to him. But anyway, that's why I composed it that way. So he's on the lower right intersection of the bottom third and the right third. So again, rule of thirds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like the fact also that the bottom is basically silhouette, silhouette and reflection in the sky, but the sky still has that color going on. So that makes you can see like a tealish bit of the sky behind the clouds and the sunset going on with the various shades of red and orange going on. So you have a very vibrant top, which is, your top third's very vibrant and your bottom third is just so, it's dark and, like you said, in thought. And like I said, I didn't even think about him being on the right third. So it's more focused on where he's been, the path he's taken to where he is, and then taking it, like I said, stopping and going, I don't know where I'm going next. Literally like, well, I've gone this far, but now where do I want to go next?
Yeah, it creates tension, I think, in the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with everything Dave said. The top has the colors, and the orange and the teal are a great combination. Through the whole middle of the frame where the horizon line is, which is, I'm okay with the horizon line being wherever it needs to be to make the photo tell the story or make the photo interesting, as long as it's straight.
Mm-hmm.
But the middle is the kind of the least interesting part of the frame. Not that it's not interesting, but it is. But it's the least interesting because the top has the color, and the bottom has that contrast, the harsh, or that stark contrast of the silhouetted rocks and the guy standing there, but it also has the reflection of the sky in it to give that color, so that it kind of balances it out, you know, almost symmetrical in a way with the color, top and bottom. But I mean, I wouldn't call it a symmetrical image, but I mean, it kind of gives a hint of symmetry with the color. Um, and I think the square crop does it justice too. You've got the gentleman's, basically his head looks like it's at the third intersection line there, and just even though he's facing out of the frame, it's still aesthetically pleasing, because you've also got the big rock on the left, like straight behind him, basically kind of near the other third intersection part of the grid lines, and yeah, uh, it's a really nice image, and I like the fact that there's still some reflection of the sky on the rocks at the very bottom. So that, I mean, if that wasn't there, you wouldn't know that they were separate rocks. So I think that was a nice touch to leave it like that. Or I don't know if you've did any editing to emphasize that little reflection on the top, but I think it really adds to it as well.
There was nothing that was crushed black there, but I did dodge the rocks a little bit just to try to bring out, some of whatever light was there. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, that's good. It's it's a banger image.
Thank you.
So next we have one from Dave.
Yep. And this I really like. This is one where you could do an image that's kind of straight on middle, but I wanted to show the steps going up. So you kind of got a pseudo rule of thirds, at least definitely making sure I'm not centering the image, and the leading lines of the steps kind of going up into the mausoleum. Now, I would say both my pictures are cemetery pictures. But it's an older cemetery where these people really went all out in terms of putting something that would stay time, that would say, here I was hundreds of years later. And this is in some places, this would be a small house, given the size of it, because this is big enough for you to walk in. This is a 2-story structure. So I like like I said, the leading lines kind of leading you up into it, and the trees kind of acting a little bit as a frame going on.
Yeah, you got a lot going on here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like compositionally, there's a lot going on. Like you said, leading lines, framing, and rule of thirds. Like Dwight, what do you see? Like, I mean, I'm sure you see the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I see the top of. I'm assuming this is a mausoleum.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got. I mean, the photo is a little bit tilted, but you've got the top of it. If you draw a vertical line from the gentleman standing on the top down, you're pretty much on the right third, right?
Right.
And then you've got the leading lines from the lower left corner that actually walk you into it. So when I first look at this thing, I see the structure, but then my eyes go to the bottom, and then I take that journey with my eyes up to the stairs and go as far as I can visually. And so I think what that does is, I started with the structure, came down across the bottom, and then it's almost like a triangle pattern that my eyes took when I saw this. So from a composition perspective, that's way better than if you centered that church. It just wouldn't have, if he would have centered it, it would have been better to have a symmetry shot, with those two
doing kind of straight on.
Yeah.
And as a teaser, that's my second shot, is more of a symmetry shot.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also when you were talking about, and this is one thing where you can have issues depending on what the I don't want to say geometry, but the lay of the land is. It's a little not, it's not in a focus of it, but if you look on the left, you can see a car on the road kind of going up to the left. So you can see that it's one of these things where if I get one part that's level, the rest of it's skewed out of place. Because you can see the tree line in the background where the tree line kind of goes from the upper left down to the lower right. But the hill kind of goes up there.
Yeah, that's tricky because if you look at the structures in the front, they almost look perfectly vertical, and then then it kind of goes off from there. I have the same problem at the Mission. If I line up the wall with a straight line, the one right across the way is off because they didn't use squares for rough cement back then. So you have to give and take.
And it's the nature of a wide angle shot too. You know, when you're like, everything that is eye level to you is probably going to be somewhat correct, but more so in the middle, I guess. But you're going to have that perspective where it goes, as it goes higher, it's going to get smaller. I mean, it's like looking up at a tall building. You know, it's just the nature of the way things are. The further away it goes, the smaller it gets. And I think if there was one tip to tell here, and you've nailed it, Dave, is right in the middle of the frame, right dead center, but now going down just a wee bit. Some of those architectural elements are perfectly horizontal, straight up and down, right in the center. And that tells me that that's a level shot. Now, if those had been skewed a little bit, like a little slanted, that might have made it, made me think that the camera wasn't quite level. But it looks to me here like you've held the camera perfectly level, and all the skewing in that, it's just natural. And the only way to get rid of that is through editing. And in the Photos app, in the crop section of the Photos app, there is a slider where you can straighten that out, but you have to be careful with that because you might lose some of the elements in the top corners, if you were to open that up in the top side. But it's just nature of wide angle photography, and this I've been guessing this was the main camera, not necessarily the ultra wide.
Yeah, I want to say it was the main one.
Yeah. So
and this was taken with the Project Indigo app. Oh
yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll probably talk a little bit more on that, later on in the future too, as it develops or evolves, I guess you could say, because it's, when we talked about it in the last show, it was such early days. But yeah, no, it's a great shot to show a lot of different things about composition, and and it's an aesthetically pleasing image too, in my mind. The stairs, leading lines up into the mausoleum, all kinds of architectural artifacts, stuff to keep your interest and go around the frame, and again, it's just a good example of composition. So this is my first one. My dog is making her way into this podcast one way or another, and this time it's on screen. One of the things about composition is putting your subject in the middle, and that's kind of what I've done here. And in a lot of cases, I might think that's a mistake. Compositionally, putting something in the dead center of the frame is something that you don't want to do. But in this case, I've got her head on the left third top, coming down from the top and coming in from the left, or close to it anyway. It's not, I don't think it's exactly on the third, like where those lines would intersect, but I think it's close enough that that it makes it interesting. it's not to me. I mean, just because it's my dog, but it's not a bad picture. It's kind of a picture that you might frame. If you're going to put a picture of your dog on the wall and frame it, this is kind of, this is something that would suit that purpose, I think. I took this with mood camera using the Kodak Gold um, simulation. I just really like the way it rendered the colors and stuff, and I used the Reflex 240. But yeah, as far as symmetry goes, the table does not look level, but I can assure you the level indicator was on. It was showing level. I think it's just because I was off to the side a little bit from the table she was standing on. That's why, So Horizon Police, don't nail me on that one.
Yeah, Greg. I mean, central composition is a thing, right?
Oh,
I
sure.
mean,
Yeah.
for portraits. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this composition. And in my short time of doing photography, in a portrait setting, you want to try to get the eyes on the line of the top third, and you're pretty much right there. I think pretty close to it with your puppy here. But now that's to me that's a great shot with the bokeh in the background. The table doesn't bother me at all. I mean, if you would have straightened that out from the perspective that you took the photo, then your doggy'd be crooked.
Yeah.
Unless you
Yeah. I think you're right.
unless you change the skew somehow. Yeah, no, great.
Yeah.
I think it's a great photo.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and also I would say a nice use of negative space too, given the fact that that background is just a shade of it's a different tan than the dog, especially with the dog's back being black, so it adds a little bit of contrast there. But also, you're using including the empty part of the table. It almost frames the dog. So if you want, it is central, but almost there's enough open, empty going around it that acts as a frame to frame the dog in the middle.
Yeah,
and like you said, it's one thing to say, like it's what you're saying about portraits. This is basically a portrait shot of the dog, and the dog. If the dog's head was centered, that may be a little bit off. Unless the dog's looking like kind of straight at you. But given the fact that the dog's body is what's centered, yeah, this, like I said, it's one of those things of rule of thirds isn't an always thing. It's good for certain things, but for a single subject like this, having it centered, especially when the dog's looking right at you,
right?
Yeah, and I should say too that I put a slight vignette on it to help lead you into the center. And the other thing I did was I thought I'd try the cleanup tool in Photos now that we're on the second beta of iOS 26. And it did a really good job right off the bat, first try, of taking the leash out. There was a leash hooked onto her back, on the back of the harness, and then it came down behind her head and down off to the left. I don't even remember where it went, whether it actually cut into the table or just went through the sand. But there was a leash on there, and you'd never know it. But hey, disclaimer: there was a leash there, and it was taken out with the cleanup tool. So I think it really did a good job of removing that. So
yeah, Dave, I think you said something that was kind of important. When there's a portrait shot and they're looking directly at you, it looks a lot better central composition, right? When was the last time you saw a portrait of somebody on the left or right third looking right at you? It doesn't look good. If they were on one of those thirds looking this way into the frame, it looks a lot better. So, yeah. I look at this as a portrait.
I think there's something to that. But I think it's also fair to say that if someone is off center, if they're off center and they're looking at the camera, I think as long as their shoulders are tilted so that their body looks into the frame, but yet they're looking at the camera, I think that's a fair way to make the composition.
Yeah.
I think there's always ways to make it work. I think a person in the center looking straight at the camera, I think that's that's
Mhm.
a bit of a faux pas there, but um, no
Greg,
pun
you did
intended.
have didn't you have a photo a few years ago, black and white photo of a gentleman looking
Oh yeah,
literally straight at the camera. His
yep,
face filled the whole thing. It
yeah,
was like a heavy grained image, and it was just striking.
yeah, yeah. I
And
did.
and that just the fact that he was in the middle looking straight at you, that was
Yeah,
just so striking, and that's where that can be definitely used, having a portrait where that really emphasized the human.
yeah, and it was heavily vignetted, I think, too.
Right, right.
But yeah, I remember that picture. One of the best portrait shots I've ever done. Dwight, if you don't know the image, I'll send it to you.
I remember seeing it. Yeah,
Okay.
that was good.
Yeah, yeah, it was fun to do. It's a kind of it's the kind of picture I've always wanted to do. And for anybody that's listening, you may remember, oh gosh, it was a couple of years ago now. I think it was a guy at work who had not cut his hair or shaved his beard since the pandemic started, and this was about 2 or 3 years into it. So he was getting set to retire, and I wanted to get his shot and do this
Mhm.
certain edit style. The edit style I learned from one of Mike James' videos. Uh, Mike is a he has he's absolutely amazing instructor for photography, especially mobile photography. He has a book called About Composition. I should have mentioned that. I should have dug
Yeah.
it out and showed everybody. But he's got a very, very well informed book about composition, and um, I mean, it's like this thick. it's it's crazy good. But anyway, he did a video of editing this style, and I forget what the style is called now, but it's very, very contrasty black and white with a lot of texture and it just comes out of the screen at you. It's a really cool, and I didn't get it as good as I wanted to. It could have been because I maybe didn't shoot raw. I shot it in portrait mode, um, but yeah, it was a fun image to
Mhm.
do, and right center of the frame, and he's actually just leaning in towards me with this look in his face. I thought, yeah, it was pretty good. It was fun to do. So next we have Dwight's image.
Yeah, so this is just an example of symmetry. I was standing on the rocks of this jetty, and when I do a symmetry photo, I try to get the elements on the right and left to line up, and it
Like
doesn't
to
look like
enter the
I did
frame
it.
at the same
Yeah,
place.
where they enter the frame at the same point. I didn't quite
Mhm.
do it here, but I was
It's kind of
close.
hard to do with rocks.
Yeah. So there's symmetry here, and then there's negative space because there were a lot of boats and a lot of people on the rocks, boats on the horizon, that I just took off. So I wanted to just keep it simple for symmetry
Mhm.
and some negative space. Just let the viewer's mind wander. So on the left is the harbor side. The right is the ocean side. The water on the right is much darker, and the water on the left is much lighter because it's more shallow. So that is
Hmm.
natural kind of the color of what it was. But obviously, I converted it to black and white.
Right. Well, also I would say leading lines, because not only is it leading you out,
Mm-hmm.
but it's leading you out and then turning to the left, and
Right.
you're almost leaning into the mountains or the hills on the left side,
Yeah,
because
that's a good point, Greg. Dave. Yeah.
yeah, there's not a lot of contrast. I don't know if it was haze or just a matter of it being black and white. Where the hills, you may not notice them at first, but the leading lines lead you right into those hills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good point.
I meant to say leading lines too. Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
reminding me. But yeah, that just kind of with the symmetry takes you on the ride through the rocks, as you
Mhm.
mentioned.
And this is a good it's a good way to deal with harsh sunlight by making it a black and white like this, because I think it's a
Mhm.
little more it's a little easier to adjust for the highlights, I think, in a black and white, or maybe just the fact that it's rocks and there's a lot of gray in the rocks to begin with, um, but yeah, as far as composition goes, it's um, definitely symmetrical. Uh, Leading lines, again, like all these pictures, in my opinion, have taken my eyes and taken them through the frame. I go straight up the middle, and then wham, you're slammed with a left turn, and you could say a left hook, but you got this left turn, and it takes you right over to the shoreline and the hills and stuff like that. But on the right hand side, you've got all that negative space, and um, you even have a bit of negative space, I guess you could say, in that big rock at the bottom, right there in the foreground. It's got some, and that in my eye, that kind of balances out symmetrically to the sky. You've got a big empty space with that rock at the bottom, and it kind of goes with the sky at the top. So there's that little element of symmetry there.
Well, what I did
Uh,
there, Greg, was it was really bright at the bottom, so I did a
mhm.
linear gradient
Oh, okay.
on a curve in a multiply blend mode. I don't want to confuse anybody, but essentially that's just I just closed off the bottom of the image just to darken it a little bit, and then it kind of faded into that rock. And I did the same with the top, just to draw the viewer into the center of the frame.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And
Yeah. Well.
the gray rocks, the lighter ones, were super bright. It was
Yeah.
harsh sunlight, so I did burn those. I isolated that tone and burned them down a little bit so they weren't so distracting.
Yeah. You kind of went Ansel Adams on this one by the sounds of it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. Now Dave's second one.
Yeah. So I didn't go perfect symmetry on this because I wanted to show a little bit of the depth, especially the Sphinx's depth. But
Mhm.
the fact that, again, this is just someone who apparently liked Egyptian stuff. He wasn't Egyptian. He wasn't, anything in particular, but he wanted to get a very Egyptian feel for his mausoleum. So you have the copper golden door with the intricate carving on it, or relief at least. I don't want to say carving, relief. You have the stairs leading up to it there. The marble here kind of really standing out versus the green, and we actually had some blue skies and it wasn't completely overcast. And I posted this on the Pittsburgh subreddit, and I had one comment that says, I came here for the titty sphinxes and I was not disappointed.
Yeah, I didn't know that they wore bikinis back then, but
I,
that's all right.
as far as I know, they're going topless here.
Oh, well, I think
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, what I will say about this one is, I think back to Greg's example of the portraiture. If you cut that doorway out, it looks like that's just a central composition, kind of a front-facing shot, whereas the body's turned a little bit, which represents the building. So I think in this case, the central composition works because the body is turned away just a little bit to show depth.
Okay, yeah, I do see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the mind can tell that this is symmetrical about the center line, if you were directly in front of it.
Right.
Yeah. I like the fact that it's a centrally located composition, but I like the fact that you went off center with it to show that depth, because um, I think it I think it I think it makes it aesthetically pleasing for the architecture. Like, it shows off um, the details about the architecture. Uh, and I think if you had gone straight on, I don't think we would have got that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's pretty good. I'll let you
Oh,
guys
thanks.
discuss this further. And I got something in my eye. I gotta go
Oh,
figure this
okay.
out.
No problem. Yeah, and now I will say when we were talking about especially with buildings and being zoomed out and it being skewed off a bit here, this is one where I did struggle with getting the ground as level as possible, but the top being just not exactly level. It's a little skewed off, and I think it's just partially a matter of the distance where I was taking it from, the ground I was taking it from wasn't level. That ground is as level as they probably could have made it in terms of for building reasons. But it's still, this is a very hilly area of town.
Yeah, I mean, if you're off to the side, then that shouldn't be a level line, right? Because now it's a perspective, right?
Right.
So if you put a point in the middle of that frame on the right-hand side and you moved it way, maybe even 20 feet out, and you put a ruler at the bottom of that cement, right, right where the grass hits
Mhm.
it, and then at the top of that roof line, the straight piece, it should hit that point way out in the distance. So a 2 point
Right.
or a 1 point uh yeah, a 1 point perspective, right? Well, it would be 2 points because you can take the angle of the roof back the other way. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think if you would have made that grass horizontal to the bottom of the frame, then you'd have a skew problem with the building. So I think it looks fine.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. And I did
Yeah,
like the symmetry of the door itself. You okay, Greg?
Oh yeah. I think it was
Okay.
just a rogue eyelash.
No, but actually, if you zoom in on the door part itself, you have the person standing and with not exactly the same image on left or right, but you have someone on left or right looking at them, and then above in the decorations, again, not perfect symmetry, but symmetry-ish with the birds overhead.
Mhm.
That's in the door.
Yeah. Yeah. Good photo.
Thanks.
Yeah. So then we got I guess that's it. Or is it? Let me see here.
I think you've only had.
You should have
only
a
shown
second one. Yeah,
There
you
it
should have a
is.
second one.
There it is. Yep. My keyboard just wasn't behaving. So yeah, so this is my third one. This is just a reflection, and I think about the only thing I can put to this is the rule of thirds, where you got the
Mhm.
tree, the main tree on the left, but it's all reflected, and then a tree off in the distance on the right. It's kind of close to the third line, but not really. And the one in the middle, it's kind of going down on a tilt or on a slant. But it's also framed. The image, like the reflection, is
Mhm.
framed by the grass in the background, along with the reflected grass. But then the grass at the front of at the bottom of the
Mhm.
frame just acts as a bit of a framing element in the composition. And this was mood camera again, and I'm working on a Fuji Reala simulation, customization. This was one of my efforts, and I think it's close to what the old film used to look like, but something I'm working on. Um, but I could have done this in black and white, but I don't think it would have. Um, this dog is something else. I don't think it would have done the image any justice, because I think it's there's just too many details, and this dog wants up now. Nope, she's out. Um, but yeah,
I think. But say,
yeah, go
Greg,
ahead.
I think definitely you needed this in color because the different shades of the green. I don't know how well that would have picked up in black and white
Yeah, I think that's
because
what I was trying to get
it would
at
have made
out,
it.
but
Yeah, it would have made it too flat, especially with the reflection. But also having that lighter, the ferny part, of the foreground where it's that kind of pale pink in
Mhm.
the that acts as an additional. If that was not you don't have the green and the pink down below, and kind of matching the, you know, the plants across the water there. I think that helps also.
Yeah.
So I mean, like I said, they're called, you know, rule. If you want to say rule, but it's really rule of thumbs, if you will, or heavy suggestions on what looks good or what has found to look good. So
Mhm.
you don't have to be exact. And this is something kind of going to the people listening. If you're newer and you're like, I want to do rule thirds, it doesn't have to be exact. You don't have to get a ruler
Yeah.
out. You know,
Oh, yeah.
the fact that you do have, basically, in my mind, you have 3 images coming down. You know, you have the harsh, I'm going to say harsh, up and down vertical, and you have a little bit more of a slant for your other one, and the one on the right where it's really kind of a grouping of trunks, and there's more of an opening there, so you can see it's much more open on the right side in the reflection versus the left, where you have that thick, heavy, thick, heavy leaves and bushes and other trees kind of giving you the background there. So
Mhm.
it's that way, it's giving you 2 different sides of an image. And that's kind of, you know, not having, actually it's kind of opposite symmetry, because they're giving you 2 different views, whether you're looking left or right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Greg, I have to be honest, and my interpretation of this is that you have broken rules here, which is 100% fine. And I think Dave was kind of saying that a little bit. I mean, we're not going to try to put that left one on the true left third.
Yeah.
What happens with me on this one is you've got those ferns coming in from the lower right into the frame. That's kind of, I see the first thing I see is the tree on the left, but then I see the ferns pointing to them, and really there is kind of a the bottom of the reflection at the top of the grass is kind of the top third, right? On the right side of the tree is the left third. So you're kind of there, but it's not interpretable right away until you look at it for a while. But either way, I see these ferns saying, "Hey, check out this reflection," right?
Yeah.
And you have to
Yeah.
look at it a while if you're thinking about composition. Nevertheless, it's still an interesting photo, but I think there's some rules broken here, but rules are meant to be broken, and I think it works for this photo. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, it's a bit of a hot mess when it comes to composition, but like you say, it works. And um, for me, I think it's because it was somewhat pleasing to look at. I can't. I keep saying pleasing to the eye or aesthetically pleasing. I think that's a real big part of composition. And um, I mean, I took other shots with different focal lengths of this scene, um, but I think this one just uh, kind of spoke the loudest to me as far as composition goes. Even though it's kind of bending a lot of the rules. So
yeah,
Mhm.
and I think is fine, and I think it
yeah,
would be a good black and white version if we can isolate the proper color channel, because I think Dave's right. If you just converted to black and white here, but if we isolate the proper color channel, I think it could work.
yeah, yeah. I might play around with it and see what I can
Mhm.
come up with.
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, that is our recent photos, and I hope the approach we're taking with this now is a positive one. Um, it's trying to further teach, I guess you could say, what we're talking about when it comes to the topic of the show, and in this case, it was composition. And I think we all did. Um, we all had some really good examples And composition. I think you can dissect the composition of just about any photo. Uh, Not just because of it could be a good composition, but also because rule breaking, right? That's all part of it. So, um, and no fines involved. So,
Yeah.
um, so I guess that's all we got about composition. Any final tips or thoughts on the subject?
No, I would say, make sure you have your grid on your phone. Again, go to settings, go to your camera app, and turn on your grid. Start working with the rule of thirds. If you've got somebody in frame that's standing there looking to the right, put them on that left third, take a shot, and just see how and then take one of the person in the center and just see how each photo affects you differently. And I think you'll start getting an idea of how important composition is.
Yeah. How about you, Dave?
And I would also say one thing to remember with composition, like I said, get out there, try, experiment a couple different things to try, but also don't over stress about it. It's one of those things that if you over stress about getting this right or getting that right, at least for me, I do this because I enjoy it. And, you know, get out there, enjoy it, try a couple different things. And if you want to try different compositions, we're in a great position where take a couple shots. Take a shot in one way and think, okay, that's one composition, that's one setup I want to use. Then do something else. And then see which one you like, but you may like both. That's the thing. You don't have to have one is definitely better than the other. There could be this I like for this reason. I've had this happen where I take a shot. It's like, I like this for this reason. I like this other shot for a different reason, but I took them pretty much from the same location. I just kind of changed my perspective or literally moved 10 feet one way or another or used a different zoom on it just to get a different feel for it. So get out there and experiment.
You're on mute, Greg.
Yeah, sorry, my dog's whining, and that's why I muted my mic because I think my
Aw.
wife went outside. But anyway, yeah. So if I had to offer one final tip, something that we can never really touched on too much was how you shoot your photo for for composition. And one thing you can do is to shoot with live photos, because if you're shooting like if you're taking a picture of a person,
Mm-hmm.
say they're off center and whatever, you can use with a live photo, you can pick a key frame that might be different than what that Apple chose for you, that you might think makes for a better composition, like whether it's somebody simply turning their head and just slightly, even just to make a little bit of difference in how it looks, um, or if you're, say you're getting some kind of an action shot, you know that'd be a great way to pick and choose which frame that you know uh, change your key photo, or your key frame in your live photo. There might be a better composition in there that you don't know about. So if you shoot live photos like Dave does, you might find, like okay, for example, Dave, that one you had, I think it was a couple of shows ago, of the people running through the woods.
Mm-hmm.
There might have been a key photo in there other than the one that you chose to show us, that could make a difference in the whole story,
Yeah.
with regards to the composition and how it shows up. So um there's all kinds of ways that you can approach your shooting when it comes to composition, and even in the editing, I guess that would be considered editing, is picking a different keyframe. um and with Dwight's black and white image, uh I think that kind of makes a difference in the composition, and with the different elements that he chose to play with, like the foreground with the linear gradient, and the and the sky and all that stuff, it changes that composition to the point where it's intentionally leading your eye somewhere. So composition is a very basic fundamental of photography, but it could be a very complicated one too, depending on how you approach it or how you look at it. So I think it was a very good topic of discussion, and I'm really glad we covered it. So I'm hoping that that brings the listeners some insight and helps them get better shots. That's what we're all about.
Yeah, and also, along the lines of live photos, you might want to mention burst photos. That's another
Yeah.
topic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Burst mode.
Mhm.
Burst mode, you can shoot I don't know how many hundreds of frames in one sequence,
Yeah, then you
but
can pick the one you want. Yeah.
yeah, like especially if it's like you're waiting for a bird to fly away from a branch, you can just sit there and hold that button down. Excuse me, and just wait for that right moment. When the bird flies away, then you've got you know at best 10 frames per second to pick from. So um, and Will Newcomb just joining us from China just in time for us to sign off. Hi, Will. How are you? um, but yeah, it's a great learning point, and it could even be considered a good starting point when learning photography is composition. So,
Mhm.
um, well, I guess on that note, we'll call it a show. We're approaching 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. So if you like this show, hit that like button and subscribe, and who knows, see what it does with the algorithm. Maybe we'll be maybe we'll be seen by a few more people, and we'll see what happens. But thanks guys for the great discussion, and I guess we'll see everybody on the next one.
Good night, everyone.